Thanks, Keith. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Fidler, a Principal Network Architect in BT Technology, and I'm currently leading BT's assessment of the opportunities and risks around encrypted DNS. So, as Keith mentioned, I presented back in UKNOF44 in Manchester. I outlined the opportunities and risks created by DoH for ISPs and called out for collaboration. In the months since then, the ecosystem discussions have evolved considerably, and also we're clearer in terms of browser and application intentions. And these technical discussions have extended out into various technical press, media articles, and even made questions in the parliamentary questions in the UK Parliament and House of Lords. So for today's presentation, I'm going to start by giving you an update on the latest IETF discussions around DoH, in particular the outcome from the July meeting in Montreal. I'm then going to move on to an update on the current browser and operating system status, and then have a wider review of various things across the industry happening in the DoH space. Then I want to focus in on where BT is going in terms of our DNS roadmap. Then I want to touch a bit on around the evolution of DoH, longer term evolution. Then I want to raise a new question. Is DoH just the tip of the iceberg of emerging IETF activities that needs operator and ISP analysis? So let's start by delving into what happened in IETF in Montreal at the end of July. At IETF 105, there was an applications doing DNS birds of a feather group, and this was a main discussion forum around DNS over HTTPS in Montreal. And as per previous meetings, it was attended by over 200 people, and this demonstrates the polarised interest in this topic. At the BOF, Mozilla and Google outlined their vision for DNS, DoH, and application support for it. We highlighted our view that there is still need for further work around operator implementation guidelines, and we would welcome, and others would too, clear best practice guidelines in terms of DoH implementation. Jim Reed presented on browser applications doing DoH and DoH push. And these discussions, at the end of these discussions, there was mixed opinions expressed, and these ranged from people supporting the need for further work and to do best current practice guidelines, to the view that the DoH work in the IETF on the protocol side was complete, and there should be no further discussions. However, the steering group and the Internet Architecture Board within the IETF have reviewed all the discussions and have published this at the end of August, their review on how this should progress going forward. And their view is that there's clear agreement that more work needs to be done in this space, and it's important to get it done sooner than later. They're still debating whether this is done through an existing working group or a new working group. They're also exploring the opportunity to have a workshop dedicated around this topic. Plus, the debates are still continuing in the application doing DNS mailing list. So I'd encourage people to track the mailing list of discussions, get involved in it. I'm also conscious that a number of the implementation internet drafts are now expired and could do with a refresh. And we also need support in terms of potentially writing new best current practice guidelines. I'm also conscious it won't be long before the next meeting in November, so I would encourage people to start to prepare for the DoH discussions now. So, moving on to where we are in terms of browser and operating system DoH status. Starting with Mozilla and Firefox. Currently on Firefox, you've got the manual capability that customers and users can opt in and select DoH manually. Mozilla have also been experimenting with detecting DNS-based parent controls and split horizon aspects. Then there was an announcement Friday night, US time, around their intentions around the space in the US, where they've announced that they intend to gradually roll out DoH with a default on approach in the US from late September onwards. And it's good to see that they've listened to some of the parental control concerns and enterprise concerns, and they plan to detect those, and if they detect them, then their intention is to disable DoH. However, I believe that is just in the upgraded process. Those settings still be available manually to users as a manual option. One thing when I was reading the blog on Friday, one thing I couldn't spot was any mention around the impact to content caching if EDNS Zero Client Subnet is blocked. So I think that's still an area which requires further investigation. Lastly, on Mozilla, is at the moment they're stating they have no plans to enable DoH by default in the UK. So moving on to Google Chrome. Last week, they released their Chrome 78 branch development version, which I understand shortly will include the capability for developers to experiment with DoH. And if this goes well, this will be promoted to a stable release towards a late October, and then followed by a launch if everything goes well. Google has stated the approach they are taking here is that they will only enable DoH on Chrome if an existing DNS resolver supports it. So they have a number of partners and they are checking, and if that mirrors onto the user's existing OS settings for DNS, then they will upgrade the customer to use DoH. If not, they will leave it as is. So that's Google's current plan. From an Apple perspective, there's no native support at the moment for DoH on Apple iOS or macOS, but we understand the Apple engineers of the IETF are currently working on a solution to add DoH support at an operating system level. And it's good to hear that they're considering policy aspects from a user perspective, enterprises and local network admin. Also, we understand that Mozilla are currently in discussion with major browsers and ISPs around the interaction between operating system and browser DNS settings. So my key takeout from all of this is that in the short term, I believe that current DoH enablement plans should not significantly impact existing UK ISP services, because Mozilla are not doing default on in the UK at the moment, and Chrome are taking the approach they will only uplift it if they detect the customer's existing DNS resolver supports DoH. However, I believe that operators and ISPs in the UK still need to plan for the longer term impacts, which could be more significant. So now moving on to a wider industry update. First thing I want to mention is yesterday. Yesterday, Comcast launched their encrypted DNS deployment initiative known as EDDI. And the goal of this is to ensure the smooth global deployment of reliable operation at scale of DNS encryption technology. And it will be great to see cross-ecosystem participation in this. So I've included the links there and also the mailing list sign up. And I would encourage people to review those and consider joining those discussions. I now want to move on to performance aspects. There's been various performance studies published recently around the performance of DoH versus plain text DNS. At the moment, many of these are suggesting that there is no significant impact or performance gap between the two. And the key ones here are Sam Knowes and Princeton. I just want to call out the Sam Knowes study, that it does mention the impact of EDNS client subnet blocking on certain ISP caches and the impact on web page download and customer experience. So this indicates very much clearly that further work is needed in this space across browsers, applications and CDN vendors. Then moving on to malware. Back in April, we said, yeah, DoH's great from a customer privacy perspective, but it also enables malware to hide as well. And in July, the first examples of malware using DoH to secure their communication channels have been published. So that's worth taking a look at and considering as well. It's also worth noting that as DoH, the profile of DoH has increased over the recent months, in the UK it's great to see that a number of the smaller UK ISPs and hosting providers have taken the initiative to launch DoH capabilities. From a wider perspective, the Internet Service Provider Association of the UK held a July DoH workshop with attendees from ISPs, DNS vendors and government regulators. And I understand there may be a follow-up workshop for this planned in mid-October. On a similar note, the European Telecommunications Network Operator Association are currently drafting up a position paper to aid their discussions with European regulators. I now want to focus more on the BT broadband approach to DNS, because I'm conscious of being quite a lot of discussion in the IETF mailing list around what ISPs do and don't do with DNS. So I wanted to give some clarity on the BT broadband position. The first thing I want to clarify is our position on DoH. It remains that we look favourably upon the security and privacy benefits it offers our customers. However, we're still concerned about the wider implementation issues and unintended consequences that it creates. I'm pleased to announce today that BT has started a proof of concept activity which will focus on BT broadband capabilities to explore our understanding of DoH and the opportunities. One topic which is often called out as a reason why we need DoH is NX domain redirection. I'm also pleased to announce today that BT Broadband intends to withdraw our current web address help capability because our view is the customers of 2020 require far less help than in 2010 when this capability was first launched. It will also enable us to assist the capability for us to do the subsequent roadmap enablement of DNSSEC. One other question being asked is, what are CPE settings in terms of ISP DNS options? So here I'm keen to clarify that historically the BT Broadband hubs do not allow customers to change their DNS settings. And we do this, and the main reason is just to keep things nice and simple and minimise complexity from our customers. And this does not stop customers selecting third-party DNS resolvers via device operating system configurations. The other question that people are regularly asking is, can we clarify how we do parental controls and how we implement the Internet Watch Foundation block list? So on parental controls, our customers can select which opt into parental controls and select which content categories they would like to restrict access to. And then we apply a DNS-based content filtering solution. For HTTP traffic going to restricted categories, customers are presented with a redirect page, clearly explaining why the content is restricted and providing further options. For HTTPS traffic, the content's restricted, but we are unable to present that redirect page because it would look like a man in the middle. Hence, some browsers may display a TLS error page here. The other aspect is we also implement the UK Internet Watch Foundation block list. This is done through a packet inspection approach and is only applicable to HTTP, but it will not be impacted by DoH. One thing I got asked about at UKNOF44 was, could I give more insight around the BT-DNS roadmap? So I'm keen to give a bit more insight to that today. So starting with this year, the remainder of this year, as I mentioned, we plan to withdraw BT Broadband web address help. We've kicked off the BT-DNS HTTPS proof of concept activity, and this is going to focus on the customer experience around DoH, the impact on web browsing, DNS resolution, failure rate, measure the impact on CDN with and without ECS, look at TLS setup and connection times and the security wrap there, look into the all-important question of what is that encryption overhead, how many extra servers am I going to have to buy if we wanted to upgrade to DoH, and of course compatibility with parental controls. So that's the proof of concept activity. Looking to next year, we intend to implement DNSSEC validation. We've seen this work in many other countries, and we now think it is time for us to reject erroneous responses and requests. Looking beyond that, over the next couple of years, we would like to have the option to implement DNS over HTTPS and DNS over TLS, starting first with broadband, then moving on to mobile. But this depends on two things. One is the outcome of the proof of concept, and the second one is how will browsers and applications recognise ISPs, trusted recursive resolvers? So those are two things which will be dependent on. And the last thing on the box on the far bottom right is the other thing I'm calling is there's still more work to be done. How is DoH discovery going to be done in terms of CPE settings? How are we going to manage the encrypted DNS and authenticate it? How are we going to distinguish between good DoH and bad DoH? How are we going to do TLS session management? So there's lots of questions which still remain unknown. Now I want to move on to the evolution of DoH. At the moment, we are focused on a number of browsers, a handful of browsers. But I see this evolving in the mid to short-term future to hundreds of mobile applications having to support DoH. Then in the longer term, is it going to move to IoT devices using DoH? So my question here is, once you roll DoH out to mobile applications and IoT, what new unintended consequences does this create? Will it potentially open up new malware risks for IoT devices? But is there light at the end of the tunnel here? Can we look at the work in IETF in the software update for Internet of Things and manufacturer usage description specification MUD? Can they give us some of the answers? Also, how can this be combined with the work of the IoT Security Foundation guidelines in the UK? So now I want to move on to my new challenge question. Is DoH just the tip of the iceberg of the wider IETF activities that need ISP and operator analysis and engagement? So let's delve into the waters of the IETF a bit. The first thing I want to cover is DNS privacy. There's a working group in the IETF around DNS private exchange working group, and they're drafting up best current practice privacy recommendations for DNS operators. And I believe this will encourage more detailed benchmarking of DNS resolvers, and DNS Privacy Org are already looking at this. So I would encourage ISPs and operators to review these drafts and consider alignment with recommended best practice. Next one I want to touch on is encrypted server name indication. So currently, server name indication is passed in the clear within the transport layer TLS handshake. Encrypted SNI is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a draft RSC proposing to encrypt this information, thus concealing the requested host name. Again, this is great for the customer, more privacy. But it may also, the flip side of that, is it's going to impact some wider ISP use of this SNI information. For example, zero rating and content control that some ISPs may use SNI for at the moment. And what I mean by zero rating here is the ability for ISPs to detect a particular type of traffic and then have policies to not charge for that traffic and not make it deprecate a customer's allowance data bundle. And the question here is more work needed in the IETF on future ways to do zero rating? Next, I want to cover transport layer security, TLS 1.3. Yes, this new version will speed up encryption connections. It removes the obsolete insecure features from previous versions and encrypts more the handshake. And yes, I know the standard is complete, but my question is, has industry fully understood the impact of this? Again, it's great from the privacy perspective, but what deployment challenges does it create for operators and ISPs? For example, the need in the longer term to upgrade CP certificates. What new limitations does it create for existing firewalls and proxies and middle boxes? What about the new session requirements, resumption requirements? Also, there's a triangle to consider here, that when customers enable TLS 1.3 certs, they combine this with ESNI and DoH. For the customer in the middle of that triangle, they've got maximum privacy now. but it equally makes cybersecurity threat detection even harder. So the next topic I want to cover is quick UDP internet connections. So this is a new UDP-based multiplex protocol and secure transport protocol, which when combined with HTTP3 is being positioned as replacing existing HTTP2 over TCP. Yes, this will give more efficient connectivity, and also it will support multiplexing and changing IP addresses. So this opens up new opportunities around TV content delivery, but equally it will create challenges around CPU support. And dare I say, what about DNS over quick? I think also operators should also consider, and I'm hearing also the mention of payload encryption and pervasive encryption being talked around with quick as well. So that's another area for operators and ISPs to consider. Then the last two areas is moving on to a more of a research one. I would encourage people to check out the Stopping Malware and Researching Threats SMART group. This is an informal research group exploring the effects of existing proposed and newly published protocols and internet standards on attack defense. They're very much about gathering evidence from security practitioners, then making this available to the IETF protocol designers, implementers and users. And they would really welcome collaboration and support here and engagement from operators, vendors, cybersecurity researchers. So I've included the links there, and I would encourage people to review them. Lastly, it would be amiss for me not to end this talk without mentioning the consolidation of the internet architecture. Yes, the internet was originally architected as the ultimate distributed platform. However, as it's matured, it's fair to say we're seeing the growth of some large centralized entities in many areas. And this debate around distributed versus centralized is ongoing within the IETF, and again an area for operator and ISP engagement. So in conclusion, BT continues to welcome the adoption of DNS encryption, and by this I mean both DNS over TLS and DNS over HTTPS to improve the security for our customers. But the implementation issues from an ISP and operator perspective still remain. And we look very much at the IETF, industry alliances, and the wider ecosystem to address this through collaboration. We see the newly formed Encrypted DNS Deployment Initiative playing a key role in these discussions. To gain our own insight more on DoH, we've kicked off our proof of concept, and we're looking to enable DNSSEC, DOT, and DoH opportunities over the next couple of years. I'd also like to make the statement that I think DoH implementation on browsers is just a starting point. Industry needs to quickly think about the impact to mobile applications of DoH and IoT devices. And also, lastly, is DoH just the tip of the iceberg of IETF activities that would benefit from wider ISP engagement and operator engagement across the UK? So I'd encourage operators to assess the opportunities, risks, and unintended consequences that may be created by the likes of TLS 1.3, ES&I and Quick, then directly engage in the IETF discussions as appropriate. Thank you for your time.